Hi, Maris. It's great to have you join myself and Rob on our podcast today. As you know, we're going to have a bit of a chat around project success. But before we get into the topic of projects specifically, I wondered if you could do a bit of an intro into yourself and a bit about Bluelight as well, if that's okay.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thanks for inviting me, Ellie. So I suppose I've personally been in the not-for-profit sector probably over 20 years, to be honest, in one guise or another. I mean, I've worked within a not-for-profit membership organisation. I've worked as a consultant to the sector, and now as leading a software development partner. So I've kind of seen it from all directions, I suppose. Bluelight formed in 2015, I believe. We're Microsoft and Dynamics CRM specialists. We all things Microsoft essentially, but particularly around Dynamics. We're very much focused on the not-for-profit sector. So the type of organisations we have with us at the moment are professional bodies, trade associations, charities, and more. All things not-for-profit, really. We have we work within the Dynamics environment, but we have our own product, which out of the box kind of is intended to provide that 70-80% fit for any typical organization. We're very focused on the delivery of successful projects. It's something that we feel very, very strongly about, but also very experienced technically across all areas, whether it's integrations, data, all of the things that make a CRM work that little bit better.
Thanks, Maris. Yeah, good to see you, by the way. Yeah, we've worked together a lot, like you say, over the since from Bluelight and before actually. And I know that, as you rightly point out, particularly with Bluelight, you've been very focused on ensuring that projects are successful. And I know you put a lot of resource that way. It is a big focus for you. It's not just about delivering, but it is about giving that project success so the clients feel the success and are not just satisfied but excited then to take the technology forward with you. There are loads of different ways that we describe success. We talk about it a lot. You and I do. Hart Square do. I guess just kind of an opening question to get us started really is, what do you think? Where you're looking at different things that might be resourcing, it might be about the planning, it might be the change management, the data. Where would you start to say, an organisation who's about to embark on a project, let's say that, what should they be really focusing in on at this point to help secure success?
A nice broad question to begin with, I suppose. I think all of it,
right?
All of it, absolutely all of it. No, I mean, certainly there are lots and lots of very, very important elements to it. But I suppose from our perspective, our experience is well, number one is relationship and collaboration. It doesn't matter how smart your partner is, how technically proficient. If you don't get on with them, it's not going to be a successful engagement, a successful partnership, I suppose, in delivering technology. You can pretty much do anything with technology nowadays. It's kind of understanding the other person's need and being able to work together successfully. I suppose a few sort of items to bring out in no particular order, but governance. I suppose governance, having some very, very clear roles and responsibilities. We would always lead through a project, but we kind of assume and kind of expect really that any organisation that we engage and work with will have a governance structure, some very, very clear roles around some of the areas, whether it's kind of senior level support and oversight, the project team themselves that are going to bear the brunt of most of the work, and those sort of subject area experts, key users that we have to kind of interact with, but not only understand how they work, but also bring them along in terms of adoption and ownership and acceptance of any kind of new systems or transformation that might be happening. Senior level understanding and support, I think, is probably a key one. I suppose purchasing decisions around technology is often done top down, and then the implementation of it is kind of bottom up, and that's sometimes a bit of a disconnect between the two, really. So yeah.
I think, no, I know what you mean. We see that too, and I think you're right. Establishing that governance, which is that period, isn't it, between the transition between, you've been selected, a panel has gone through a process, selected you to work with, and built a relationship with you, as you say, because of that personal piece. But then, not always, but the majority of the delivery team is probably not the same group of people, is it? Maybe you've got a senior sponsor or something like that comes across, but when you're putting that project team together, it is a new group. So that establishing the governance and getting the project off on the right footing, incredibly important. including the resourcing side of that. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, as I said, having a sort of a strong senior presence in terms of, to make sure that it's translated as to, why we're doing this and what your role is in this and how we're going to work with our partner to achieve this is absolutely key. An awful lot of people that are going to be involved in projects that we deliver are, they have day jobs, they have other things that they need to be doing. You need to both translate the need and the approach to it, but also make room for them, support them in being able to be fully involved in the process.
And is that where you see one of the areas where you see that senior client side role being important, because it's that person who's going to give the delivery team the capacity to focus on the project? So you've got two big things that you've mentioned there. One about people's ability to focus, to understand what we're trying to achieve and focus on it, and then make the decisions around it. So do you see that, are there occasions where you kind of escalating up into that senior role to say, look, your team need more capacity, everything's fine, but they need more capacity to support what we're doing this side?
I think so. And a lot of the time, I mean, best intentions in terms of, resourcing and making people available and making sure they're supported. But, that has to be planned for alongside what else is going to be going on. What you don't want is kind of, people being picked off to do something more important or more urgent. Obviously, that will always be the case, and hopefully we're flexible enough and can collaborate to be able to sort of make that up, but we do want a committed engagement basically, and I think senior level support is absolutely key in being able to define it from the outset, but also make sure that they're not just talking a good game as part of the process. That they are actually really supporting people, and if we do need to escalate something in terms of resourcing, then we'll do that. And it's not just about resourcing from the outset. I mean, it can be sometimes a sort of a long process. You want to sort of watch out for any sort of fatigue or frustration that might arise because of the fact that people are involved in something that's, sometimes can be a little bit more complex, I suppose. And we just got to watch out for that and help them.
Yeah. And is that something where we then start to talk about change management as much as project management, if you know what I mean? Because we're talking about the senior stakeholder has to have the vision and share the vision of what we're trying to achieve, and then keeping teams not just engaged but enthused and energetic, like you say, mitigating against change fatigue. Is that where we start? I know it's maybe it's semantics, you could dismiss it out of hand or something. It's all just part of what we have to do, right? But in kind of that discipline area, when we're talking to clients about what they need to think, the terms they need to think in, is where we stray into change management, get away from just tech. It's not a tech implementation, it's changing the way you work and therefore engaging with your staff around it.
I think so, definitely. I mean, they're always change management projects, change management processes. The technology is almost entirely secondary, to be perfectly honest. You're asking, and particularly the types of organizations that, within the not-for-profit sector work very, very differently. You might have organizations that, we work with a number of organizations who have people that have been working with them for, 15, 20 years. They've carried out certain processes, relatively successfully. They're very happy doing what they're doing. And I suppose when kind of senior management want to evolve the organization or have some very transformational kind of strategic goals, you need to be able to kind of translate that to the people that are going to be doing an awful lot of the work, but not just in project, but also, what's going to happen, once, let's say, that initial phase has happened. You want, a strong sort of presence within the organization that's going to sort of maintain and evolve and push things on as they go through in terms of processes and technology.
Yeah. Do you think that is something specific, I say specific or heightened in the sector? Because we talked before about one of the great things about the sector. One of the reasons we've both spent our careers in it is that the people who work for non-profits tend to be connected to the cause, associated with the mission, whatever it may be, whether it's a charity or membership body or whatever, or that they're a practitioner and now they've moved across to their membership body, and there is that quite kind of preciousness around that and a really close connection. Do you think that makes people potentially more resistant to change?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. It's I suppose that caring about what you do, and certainly I would say that within the not-for-profit sector there is a much higher focus on why we're doing it, so an awful lot of the time, I suppose, a lot of teams, a lot of people within these organizations have a very clear kind of idea as to why they're in that job and why they're doing it. So for somebody to come along and say, right, you need to change the way you work, they're going to be a little bit more suspicious than your strictly commercial organization, who I suppose to an extent they will simply look at the bottom line or doing things more efficiently, and therefore might be a little bit more open to that kind of transformational aspect, or care less, possibly. Sure.
Yeah. It is that, though, isn't it? It's a really good point, because it is that cultural thing, isn't it? The people, a lot of the employees there work there associated with the cause. So it's all about the why for them, and we should adopt that same culture when talking about a change project, and focus much more on the why this is good for the organisation and the cause, like you say, how it better serves the mission. To kind of align the project culture with the organisational culture a bit more. Does that make sense?
I think so. I mean, the sort of key objectives that you'll usually kind of hear about is get closer to our stakeholders, better support our community, but they can be a little bit vague at that level in terms of this is what we're kind of aiming for, but then much more specific when it comes to raise fundraising by X% or increase membership by X%. So it's almost like a lot of these objectives that we see certainly is, that there's definitely very much the kind of idealistic, the why kind of aspect, but more often than not, they fall into numbers, which are more easily measurable. So yeah, absolutely, I would agree.
Yeah, I think that's the point, isn't it? The numbers become measurable. The numbers are the measurable part, but there's a direct correlation between, so raise more money to serve the cause, increase membership to provide better services, run a bigger conference, whatever it may be, be able to provide more insight, or better case support or something along those lines. Interesting. Can we just pick up on one of the other points around that kind of project team, project sponsor role, the senior role, the governance piece. Coming back on that just a little bit, to talk about decision making, because you mentioned the need for having like a strong sponsor, and it's one of those conversations we have internally. Yes, it's really good to have a strong sponsor when you're escalating decisions up to them, but conversely, you need a sponsor who's confident to empower the team, because if the team can't make timely decisions, that's a real blocker, isn't it, at times?
Definitely, I think you've kind of hit the nail on the head there. I suppose the kind of the sponsor role, that kind of senior oversight role, is kind of there to provide assurance, both to, let's say, a board level, but also to the team themselves that they're kind of going in the right direction. What I suppose we don't necessarily want is for them to be a single sort of point of contact, a blockage essentially, on decision-making processes. So there's a degree of coaching and empowering that has to happen to be able to, I mean, we generally run projects, I suppose, in terms of reporting by exception. I mean, there are, the usual kind of governance and comms and processes around that. But to an extent, you kind of want the team to be completely enabled to carry this through, and just simply use, I suppose, the senior level for oversight and for support if they need to do something that they themselves, such as releasing more resource or making some decisions at that top level that will release them to kind of move on with the project. But they should be to an extent entirely autonomous, really.
The project team needs to be, doesn't it? Like you say, it needs to be empowered, autonomous, making those decisions in timely fashion, and then able to call on support and get it when it's needed. Yeah, interesting.
I mean, we've seen all different types. Very much the kind of the strict, at each milestone, at each point, I need to see and understand and sign off and everything, which can really slow things down and causes a degree of kind of, I'm going to say resentment, but I suppose the decision making apparatus just moves up all the time. We've also seen a slightly more sort of collaborative or sort of coaching style of, I suppose, governance, where it's not necessarily decision. I suppose the senior executive is making a decision, but it's very much done on the recommendation of the team. I'm not going to say it's obviously that can fall into a rubber stamp kind of aspect, which you don't want. And really what you want is for some critical, features, some critical kind of questioning, but to allow the project team to know that you're there if you need them, but to be able to move on without you.
Yeah, and that's the thing, because when you're in that project team, you do actually want to be just, you want to feel like you're being taken notice of, so your recommendation being listened to, but you want it to be actively listened to. You want to be a little bit critiqued, a little bit of challenge, because then you know that people care as well and are still engaged with the project as well. And that's quite supportive when they are, I find.
Oh, definitely. Absolutely.
And do you then think that leads into, so if you then start to look, we're talking about project success, right? And about the overall success in terms of achieving objectives, which are longer term. It's not about the technology implementation as such, is it? It goes on beyond that. And do you think if you've got that mix right within the project itself, so you have now an empowered and supportive project team, they are better placed to then drive the solution forward when you move into BAU, because they're not going to disconnect from it. They're not maybe not be quite so tired by it as well, but also really they're actually very much engaged with it and aware of what they can now do.
I think that's a key aspect. It's not just about someone doing the work. Is somebody inputting in what this thing should look like and how it affects them. But also absolutely that kind of, as you move into business as usual, you want this to be owned, adopted, and maintained and allowed to evolve as part of the kind of the operational team. So that sort of hearts and mind kind of aspect can't happen at the end of the process where you go, right, there you go, guys, start using it and hope it all goes well, right?
Good luck with that.
Yeah, which certainly happens. I think it's probably fair to say that most kind of engagements, I suppose most clients we work with have already thought about this, and they have a reasonable understanding about the kind of the do's and don'ts and the need to have people in there right from the beginning. But the execution sometimes can be a little bit different, when suddenly, oh, it's a busy time, so you guys carry on, we're going to have to pull everybody off it. So you just need to be consistent and plan things out properly.
Yeah, like I said, the planning's key, isn't it? Because like you said, if you end up just delivering a piece of technology to them, that's not going to succeed. But we definitely, I mean, not often, thankfully, but definitely see some organisations who stutter at least when going into BAU, because they're kind of like, okay, project's over, so everyone goes back to their day job, and they haven't put in the thoughts, that kind of the visionary piece around, okay, who's now going to own and drive it forward. And I think sometimes that's fallen on you, hasn't it? As a tech partner, to actually then say, no, come on, guys, we need to operationalize this. Yeah, you have to come out of project mode a bit.
Absolutely. I mean, I suppose the model that we kind of it's almost like a sort of it's like a peak. So we kind of start. I'm not going to say slowly, but we start in a comfortable kind of way until you kind of hit that sort of peak during the project where it's kind of full on. And then the idea is that you kind of almost, what you should be doing is kind of removing the stabilizers a little bit at a time as you go through the sort of the coming months, I suppose, and certainly that first year of very, very different technology and very often very different processes. So the idea is that the users themselves and certainly the structure within the organization should be more and more empowered as you go through. And of course, I mean, technology can do anything for you. It's really how do you want to use it? What fits best for your processes? So we kind of see the adoption and the evolution of processes and how users are kind of using the technology. The idea is that it should be it should be being built throughout the project, and then I'm not going to say that we kind of leave them to it post launch, but the idea is that they're, to an extent, we'll always be there to support them, but to an extent that they're kind of self-sufficient in terms of being able to do their jobs.
Yeah, because that's again, so it's not disruptive. I think we said, nowadays the go live should be not quite underwhelming, but it shouldn't be as disruptive as like 10 years ago. That moment was huge, wasn't it? Now I think we've all learned quite a lot about having the more successful project implementation for the duration means it's a smoother, lighter landing almost when you actually go live. And in the nicest sense, go live is then, okay, here's the final data set and you use this system as your main system. It's not it's not quite the big bang that it used to be. Is that fair?
No, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, we definitely kind of operate on that kind of model. So, as we go through, and as I said, that kind of peak of activity and formality, let's say, that goes into that kind of testing period just before go live. It should be kind of almost like a dress rehearsal. So when the time comes, I mean, I've kind of, at CRM go live, I've certainly said I was a bit of a damn squib sometimes, because it's like, people are kind of going, "Are we live? Is something happening?" And you're like, "Yep," and that's exactly kind of how it should be.
Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely. That's and definitely, I mean, technology has changed. The way things are done have certainly changed, and that's certainly how we would approach it. That it's a smooth transition with, a barely noticeable is kind of how we would want to do it.
Mm. When you say that about the way technology has changed to help us make that a smoother process, can you just tell us a bit more about that? Because obviously it's about how you're able to deploy the technology for a client, isn't it? In part, but do you find that the technology, the capability that technology now gives you, enables you to make that whole process a bit smoother? That's really interesting.
Yes, but I'm not going to say it's perfect always, because
Sure.
it's the whole "with great power comes great responsibility" type of I mean, technology can be done at speed now, at speed and at scales that was never the case 10, 20 years ago, certainly.
Mm.
And what that means is that should you need to change something, you can, but it needs to be kind of done carefully and very much in concert with the users and the process, and what the key aims are. So yeah, very, very powerful technology there. But as I said, you just got to plan it, rather than, you can do things very quickly, but then you can make mistakes very quickly. So you just want to make sure it's carefully thought through.
Yeah. And does that also then, raise the spectre of our favourite, or not our favourite, but data's probably our favourite. But next on the list would be scope creep, yeah? Because as you say, technology now can do everything and anything.
Mhm.
And as your client is going through that process, they get to see more of what the technology is capable of.
Mhm.
Is containing scope, does that then become harder? Because that's another part of success for the time and budget for phase one, at least.
Yes, I mean, and again, you kind of, it's almost like the kind of the spectre of scope creep is throughout the project. With some engagements, it works really, really well, and this is where the governance kind of aspect comes into it. Ultimately, any organization is a sort of a collection of individuals who have different focuses. Everybody's going to want something that's going to, meet their objectives as part of the whole, strategy. So everyone's going to want something particular, and not every single one of those things is going to meet the objectives as quickly, or as effectively, or as cost effectively as the organization as a whole needs. So you do need that kind of governance structure to say what to say no a lot of the time. And it's the simplest but hardest thing to do an awful lot of the time. So if you're able to have that kind of thread, that control as you go through, there will always be change. I mean, it's the way of the world. I mean, it's constant change, but being able to, I suppose, prioritize, say no, we'll come back to that, and this is when, and this is how, is absolutely key as part of the process. I suppose the post-launch aspect can also be a challenge, in a sense that people suddenly see some very shiny, very powerful things, and then go, "Well, can I have more, please? Can we do this now?" And again, it's kind of, just making sure that you're able to kind of prioritize those key kind of elements that will give you the, I mean, a very good example is of course the last 2 years, in terms of remote working, no face-to-face events and that kind of aspect. And with a couple of projects right in the midst of lockdown, suddenly the project kind of changed dramatically. It was a case of, well, look, events is a very, very big piece of both our strategy and our finances. Pays the bills at the end of the day. And we need to move to kind of virtual events in a much more powerful, much more kind of sophisticated way that we can at the moment, really quickly. So it's a kind of a key kind of example of where organizations just gone, well, look, we're going to have to forget about this bit and really, really focus on that. So I wouldn't call that kind of scope creep necessarily. It's obviously taking to the organization is met as quickly as possible.
Sorry, Marcy, just cut for a second there.
Sorry about that. So
that's right, Nick. I was saying about not so much scope creep, more about, I suppose, what external circumstances forcing a change of priorities. That kind of, yeah, that's the situation we were in for the past couple of years, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And you just got to be able to both take advantage and also see the risks and being able to meet them really with technology.
Manage them. Yeah.
No, that's really interesting, and I was just kind of reflecting on collectively everything you've kind of been discussing there. And for me, what really stands out is, people and planning are kind of the heart of what you're saying and there, and also, a lot of what we say here at Hart Square, people are the heart of projects, whether that's, your resourcing side, getting the roles right, governance, things like that. So that's really interesting and kind of, I guess, emphasises what we see and sort of discuss as well. Just conscious of time, I want to get your thoughts really on kind of trends and things that you see specifically in the non-profit space, as you say you work and have worked in that space for a while. Is there any sort of upcoming trends in the space, whether that's technology or just how projects are run, that you think are being adopted well, or are being challenged by the sector, or even technology itself? Just get your thoughts on that really.
Yeah, I mean, probably in a couple of areas. I mean, in terms of, I suppose, technology. I suppose let's kind of look at technology. I mean, it's probably fair to say that it goes in cycles, whether it's kind of platform based, very configurable, very custom. It does go in cycles. I'm sure there's a graph somewhere in terms of people going back and forth in terms of what their preference is. But I think in terms of systems, technology as a whole, we're certainly seeing a lot more people looking at a best-in-class kind of approach, where I suppose up until very recently, and particularly I think pre kind of pandemic, people were looking for that one-stop shop thing that can do everything for you. And obviously that has its place, but what we're seeing much more so now, particularly within charities, is that they want a sophisticated, powerful, flexible, robust CRM, but then they will look at different platforms which are best in their class in terms of whether it's fundraising or events or communications, marketing, whatever it might be, and just make sure that that's integrated into the CRM. So they're a little bit more flexible in picking and choosing, and because I suppose of the kind of increased interoperability, the integration between all these systems, it allows them much more flexibility in what they want to do. It can also be more cost effective, not kind of reinventing the wheel and going out and getting the things, the platforms, the technology that works for you and plugging them into your CRM. That's certainly one. I think the other point you were asking was about projects in, delivery of projects. There's always going to be the bun fight between kind of waterfall and agile and how people do different things. And there's definitely pros and cons with both of those, but certainly how we work and what we're finding more and more technology partners to do is kind of have that hybrid approach, where I suppose within the not-for-profit sector in particular, because of the way that funding, I suppose, in terms of an investment in technology, clients need a degree of comfort, a degree of certainty as to the costs and the time and the deliverable. So they want that kind of certainty, but then they also want the flexibility and that iterative kind of collaborative kind of approach to delivering projects. So certainly what we like to do is provide kind of a framework overall that gives you a degree of certainty, but within that to be slightly more dynamic in being able to collaborate quickly to deliver projects very, very quickly. So those be the two aspects that I would say I'm noticing certainly within the not-for-profit sector, and particularly over the last year or two.
Brilliant, thanks very much. Yeah, that's really interesting. I think you're right. I think that getting the balance of kind of where the more agile iterative part, where you kind of play on the strengths of each element of that, I suppose. You get a bit more robustness, a bit more governance in the waterfall aspect, so maybe that's the foundation piece, and then when it comes to the delivery, actually that kind of gives you a better framework maybe to be agile and iterative through the actual build and configuration part. But yeah, definitely see that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there'll be lots of sort of agile evangelists out there that will be spitting out their breakfast, but it's about kind of a common sense approach that works for an organization, but certainly the sector in particular. Very, very specific methodologies within possibly different sectors, but certainly what we found is that most not-for-profit sector organisations we work with want a degree of certainty. What's it going to cost? So I suppose Agile doesn't necessarily lend itself that well to that, certainly within the sector. But again, different organisations, different partners will obviously do ways that very will work in very different ways. So I can't criticise or recommend any of those.
No, understood.
Cool. Yeah, no, that's really interesting to kind of hear about, even in the system side. As we say, a lot's changed in the last few years, so everybody's a lot more kind of focused on digital and how that's incorporated into their organisations. So that's really interesting to hear. But conscious of time, and we've covered lots of really great stuff there. So just to round that off really and say thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today. We hope you enjoyed it. We've got lots of learnings for ourselves from that as well. So it's really great. So thank you.
Anytime. Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
Nice one. Thanks, Maris. See you soon.
Thank you.